A village near Yeovil in Somerset. Tom Coryate was born in 1577, and his father was the rector of the parish church. In 1611, Tom published a travel guide, a remarkable chronicle by one of the first grand tourists. 3 years earlier, he'd walked alone from Odcombe across Europe and back, recording all he saw. In his 6-month travels, the city that impressed him the most was Venice. Though the incomparable and most decantated majesty of this city doth deserve a far more elegant pencil to paint her out in her colours than mine, for I ingenuously confess mine own unworthiness to describe so beautiful, so glorious a city, because my unpolished pen may rather stain and eclipse the resplendent rays of her unparalleled beauty, than add any lustre unto it. Such is the rareness of the situation of Venice, that it doth drive into admiration all strangers that upon their first arrival behold the same. For it is built altogether upon the water in the innermost gulf of the Adriatic Sea, from which it is divided by a certain great bank, at least 50 miles in length. This bank is so necessary a defence for the city, that it serveth instead of a strong wall, to repulse the violence of the furious waves of the sea. For were not this bank interposed like a bulwark betwixt the city and the sea, the waves would utterly overwhelm and deface the city in a moment. Venice is divided in the middle by a goodly fair channel, which they call Canal il Grande. It is crooked and made in the form of a Roman S. In length 1,300 paces, and in breadth at least 40, in some places more. Both the sides of this channel are adorned with many sumptuous and magnificent palaces that stand very near to the water, and make a most glorious show. Every palace of any principal note hath a pretty walk or open gallery betwixt the wall of the house and the brink of the river's bank, the extremity whereof is garnished with fair pillars that are finely arched at the top. Somewhat above the middle of the front of the building, a very pleasant little terrace that jutteth out, the edge whereof is decked with many pretty little turned pillars to lean over. They give great grace to the whole edifice, and serve only for this purpose, that people may from that place contemplate and view the parts of the city round them. There is only one bridge to go over and joineth together both the banks of the channel. This bridge is commonly called Ponte do Rialto, and is the fairest bridge by many degrees for one arch that I ever saw, read, or heard of. It was first built with timber, but because that was not correspondent to the magnificence of the other parts of the city, they defaced that, and built this most sumptuous bridge, with squared white stone, having 2 rows of pretty little houses, which are only shops, not dwelling houses. Behind these shops there are very fair stairs to the top. Moreover, this bridge hath 2 terraces, made at the edge of the same on both sides, to lean over and behold the goodly buildings about the Canal Il Grande. At the top of the bridge there are advanced 2 fair arches to a pretty convenient height, which do greatly adorn the bridge. Amongst many things that moved great admiration in me in Venice, that was not the least, to consider the marvellous affluence and exuberancy of all things tending to the sustentation of man's life. For they have neither meadows nor pastures nor arable grounds near their city to yield them corn and victuals. Yet I have seen their marketplaces exceedingly well furnished with all manner of necessities. I have observed a thing amongst the Venetians that I have not a little wondered at, that their gentlemen and greatest senators, a man worth perhaps 2,000,000 ducats, will come into the marketplace and buy their flesh, fish, fruits, and other such things as are necessary for the maintenance of their family. A token indeed of frugality, which is commendable in all men, but methinks it is not an argument of true generosity, that a noble spirit should deject itself to these petty and base matters, that are fitter to be done by servants than men of great parentage. Therefore I commend mine own countryman, the English gentleman, that scorneth to go into the market to buy his victuals and other necessaries for housekeeping, but employeth his cook for those inferior and sordid affairs. Each street hath many bridges. The whole number of them is said to be 450. Almost every channel hath his land street adjoining to it, which is of so convenient a breadth that 5 or 6 persons may walk together there side by side, and some are so narrow that but 2 can walk together, in some but 1. The channels are very singular ornaments to the city, through which they run even as the veins do through the body of a man, and do disgorge into the Canal Il Grande. They impart 2 principal commodities to the city, the one, that it carrieth away all the garbage and filthiness that falleth into them, the other, that they serve the Venetians, instead of streets, to pass with far more expedition on the same than they can do on their land streets, and that by certain little boats, which they call gondolas, the fairest that I ever saw in any place. In the inside, the benches are finely covered with leather, very neatly garnished with fine linen cloth, the edge whereof is laced. The ends are beautified with 2 pretty devices, for each hath a crooked thing made in the form of a dolphin's tail, with the fins very artificially represented. The watermen that row these never sit as ours do, but always stand, and that at the farthest end of them. Of these gondolas, they say there are 10,000 about the city. There are 13 ferries, which they commonly call traghetti, where passengers may be transported in a gondola to what place of the city they will. One is under this Rialto bridge, but the boatmen that attend at this ferry are the most vicious and licentious varlets. For if a stranger entereth into one of their gondolas, and doth not presently tell them whither he will go, they will without restraint carry him off forsooth, where his plumes shall be well pulled before he cometh forth again. I was at the monastery of the Benedictine monks called St. George's, which is situate half a mile southward from St. Mark's Place. It is a passing sumptuous place, and the fairest and richest monastery without comparison in all Venice. The church dedicated to St. John and Paul, which belongeth to the Dominican friars, is a very glorious work both within and without, for the whole front of it is built of pure alabaster, wherein are contrived many curious borders, images, lions, and the arms of St. Mark. In a yard adjoining hard to this church, there is erected a goodly colossus, all of alabaster, supported with 6 fair pillars, on the top whereof the statue of Bartholomew Colleoni is advanced in his complete armour on horseback. He had his name from having 3 stones, for the Italian word coglione doth signify a testicle. His horse and himself made correspondent to the full proportion of a living man and horse. Not far from this statue I observed a nunnery church, called the Church of Madonna Miraculosa, which, although it were little, yet for the outward workmanship thereof it was the fairest that I saw in my travels. For all the outward walls round about were built of pure milk-white alabaster. Within the same I saw upon one of the altars 2 exceedingly great candles, even as big as the greatest part of my thigh. I visited the church of the Grecians called St. George's. It was my hap to be there at their Greekish liturgy in the morning. Most of these Grecians are very black, and all of them, both men and children, do wear long hair, much longer than any other man's besides that I could perceive in all Venice. A fashion unseemly and very ruffian-like. The burials are so strange in Venice that they differ not only from England, but from all other nations whatsoever in Christendom. For they carry the corpse to church, with the face, hands, and feet all naked, and wearing the same apparel that the person wore lately before it died. Also I observed another thing that savoureth of intolerable superstition. Many a man that hath been a licentious liver is buried in the habits of a Franciscan friar. The reason, forsooth, is because they believe there is such a virtue in the friar's cowl that it will procure them remission of their sins. A most impious opinion. There are certain desperate villains in Venice, who at some unlawful times do commit great villainy. They wander abroad very late in the night for their prey, like hungry lions, being armed with a little sharp dagger. They lurk commonly by the waterside, and if they happen to meet any man that is worth the rifling, they will stab him, take away all about him that is of any worth, and when they have thoroughly pulled his plumes, they will throw him into one of the channels. But they buy this booty very dear if they are apprehended, for they are executed. I was at a place where the whole fraternity of the Jews dwelleth together, which is called the Ghetto, being an island, for it is enclosed round about with water. They are distinguished and discerned from the Christians by their habits on their heads. They have diverse synagogues in their ghetto, at the least 7, where all of them do meet together on their Sabbath. I observed some few of those Jews to be such good and proper men that our English proverb, to look like a Jew, whereby is meant sometimes a weather-beaten, warp-faced fellow, is not true. For indeed I noticed some of them to be most elegant and sweet-featured persons, which gave me occasion the more to lament their religion. There are two very fair and spacious piazzas or market-places in the city, besides that of St. Mark, whereof the finest is St. Stephen's, being indeed of a notable length, even 287 paces long, for I paced it, but of a mean breadth, only 61. Here every Sunday and holy day in the evening the young men of the city do exercise themselves. The other piazza is a fair one also, that of St. Paul. These two have their names from churches, the first from St. Stephen's Church adjoining to it, where there is a convent of friars, and the other from St. Paul's Church hard by, which, although it be but little, yet it is passing glorious and beautiful. I passed in a gondola to pleasant Murano, distant about a little mile from the city, where they make their delicate Venice glasses, so famous over all Christendom for the incomparable fineness thereof. This Murano is a very delectable and populous place, having many fair buildings, both public and private. Almost all the wives, widows and maids do walk abroad with their breasts all naked, and many of them have their backs also naked, even almost to the middle, which some do cover with a slight linen, or such other thin stuff. A fashion, methinks, very uncivil and unseemly, especially if the beholder might plainly see them. For I believe unto many that have lewd or lustful nature, they would minister a great incentive and fomentation of luxurious desires. I will make relation of courtesans as being a thing incident and very proper to this discourse, especially because the name of a courtesan of Venice is famous over all Christendom. For it is thought there are, in the whole city and other adjacent places, at the least 20,000, whereof many are esteemed so loose that they are said to open their quivers to every arrow. A most ungodly thing, without doubt, that there should be a toleration of such licentious wantons in so glorious, so potent, so renowned a city. If any of them happen to have children, as indeed they have but few, for according to the old proverb, the best carpenters make the fewest chips, they are brought up either at their own charge, or in a certain house for the courtesan bastards, which I saw eastward above St. Mark's Street, in the south wall of which building I observed a certain iron grate, betwixt which there is a convenient little space to put in an infant. Hither doth the mother bring the child shortly after it is born into the world, and from thenceforth the mother is absolutely discharged of her child. Thus I have related to thee as many notable matters of this noble city, as either I could see with mine own eyes, or hear from the report of credible and worthy persons, or derive from the monuments of learned and authentic writers that I found in the city. And so at length I finish this treatise of this incomparable city, this most beautiful queen, this untainted virgin, this paradise, this rich diadem and most flourishing garland of Christendom. the sight whereof hath yieldeth unto me such infinite and unspeakable contentment.